This is the Surly Grognards for May 21st, 2013. This is Peter Bowman, and as usual, I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Eric Carlson. How are you doing tonight, Eric?
Doing all right.
Excellent. Excellent. So, this week, we're going to be talking about big games and small games. You know, the bonuses of having large gaming groups and the bonuses of having small gaming groups. And sort of the tips and tricks you can use for, and the differences you'll have in games that you run if you've got a particularly large gaming group or a particularly small gaming group.
Well, let's assume the average gaming group is 5, including the game master. Maybe 5 to 6.
5 to 6. That's I would say that's roughly average. Yes. So we're going to work off the assumption that your average gaming group, I agree with Eric, is either 5 or 6 players counting the game master. Eric's spot on with that. Actually, my experience has been pretty spot on.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty much the average size game.
I mean, I've played with, of course, I've played with smaller groups and have played with bigger groups, and we're going to touch about some of the benefits and drawbacks to both those things.
Yes, and there are benefits and drawbacks to both of them.
Indeed. So, okay, Eric, I got to ask first though, how often have you played in like large groups? Like, we're talking like 10 or more players.
A few times. I want to say like maybe 7 or 8 campaigns total. It's actually, that's only because I have a really long history of gaming.
Right. I've been in a couple of games that were particularly huge.
Yeah. I don't think I've been in any that have been bigger than 12. I think 12 is the biggest.
I think that's bigger than anything I've been involved in.
12 is crazy though. That didn't last very long.
Yeah, I've never been in the biggest game I've been involved in that went for any period of time. I'm trying to remember how it was pretty big. It was with a bunch of people I knew who went to MIT. We played over at sort of the MIT dorms. It started during the summer one year. I'm trying to remember how many players were in that. It was pretty big. I was a player in that too. I was not game mastering that, thank God.
Because you would be mad to try.
Well, yeah. Honestly, it was a good group of people. And that ran for a while, and it was definitively the biggest long running game I've ever been involved in. And I think that was probably I want to say around 9 players total, counting the game master.
That's sizable.
Yeah. I've been in several where I've been in several where it was 7 counting the game master. That's sort of reasonable. 6 players in the game master, that happens. That honestly used to be almost sort of standard to a degree, but the most common I've been in those either is what we talked about, sort of the average is either 4 or 5 PCs.
Yeah, that's pretty much the standard. But yeah, I've been in some really, really big ones.
So I want to ask you this, Eric. So from the player seat, first off, I'm assuming you've not run anything that big, right?
No, not at all. Right. I'm not that masochistic.
Yeah. Well, you don't game master very often, and you pick and choose your games when you game master, right?
Yes.
So, but from the player seat, what would you say the biggest advantage to having a group that big was?
From the player seat, probably the biggest advantage would be there is a lot going on as far as player interactions go.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're seeing all sorts of like different relationships develop and whatnot. And if you want to be kind of sneaky, there's always someone to distract you, to be distracting.
Right. Yeah, I would say that there's definitely a lot of that going on. A lot of that can be going on, is what I should say.
Yeah, a lot of that can be going on, and there's also the fact that every session is kind of like a party with all your droogs.
Yeah, there's definitely that. Also, I would say
also
that
means nothing's getting done.
To a degree, I would say that there's some games will work better with that than others. Bizarrely, if you've got a particularly good storyteller, I think Amber works remarkably well with large groups. But that's largely due to some of the nature about Amber. The other big advantage to having a big group is that if a player or two can't make it for a given session, it's much less of a problem. because it means you
Yeah.
still have most of the group. You still have most of the group there.
Yeah, that's another advantage of a big game is unless something is hinging on a couple players, people can drop in and out fairly frequently without really affecting things too much.
Right. Now, that bit right there with the people can drop in and out without affecting things too much is simultaneously a strength and a weakness in of a big group.
Yes.
Because the big drawback for having a big group is there's much less time for an individual character to get their moment, their moments. Because unless someone's particularly dominating a group, which is a problem, which is a problem in and of itself. But there's much less, individual characters will have much less impact on the game and the story because there is more spotlight has to be shared around.
Yeah. This is a problem. And the more what's the phrase I'm looking for? More outgoing, I guess. Exhibitionist leading players tend to hog it.
Yeah. But yeah, the players who are more comfortable in the spotlight tend to get more of it in the games like that, especially in games like that. I mean, they generally get more of it anyways, but it's harder for the game master to sort of
steer it away from them.
Yeah, weirdly, you'd think with more players it would almost be easier, but what ends up happening, unless the group's particularly well balanced, is that there'll be one or two players who tend to dominate the scenes and such.
Yeah.
Just because it's easier to manage the game that way. But I agree with you that there's definitely a lot of advantage to being able to have inter-party sort of relationships develop between characters and such. And as I said, due to the way Amber is structured, I think a large group in some ways is beneficial for it, just for a couple of reasons. One of them being that one of the things that's supposed to be happening in Amber is like the party often will end up splitting up and going to different places. And with a large group, you're more likely to have small groups of players wandering off together. The characters wandering off together. And so while the game master will focus on one group, the others can just sort of role play amongst themselves and with their characters as they are. And and the way it's supposed to be structured is that you're supposed to do that, and then if something important comes up, they basically say, "Hey GM, we got something that we need adjudication on here," and you go over, you deal with it then, etc. That's because Amber is weird.
Ember is weird, yeah.
Yeah, it's a great game, really interesting, but it's a strange beastie.
Yes.
That said, also the Ember attribute auction becomes much more interesting when you've got a large group of players, because there's a lot more heated rivalry bidding over the various rankings in the stats.
Nothing like going deep into bad stuff.
It's like, but I must be higher ranking than. And the thing is, but anyway, I'll talk about Amber some other time. But, but yeah, I would definitely say that's the biggest disadvantages for a large group, though. The biggest disadvantage for a large group, especially in a sort of more combat-heavy game, is combat will take forever.
Yes.
Because you have
absolutely
boatload of people to get through. It's hard to get players going in any particular direction because you've got the whole herding cats problem.
Yep. One tangent can derail things for a whole session.
Yeah, definitely. And you also increase the chance of basically a player throwing a spanner into the works for not just for the game master's plot, but for everybody else.
Yeah.
Sorry, go.
And I'm just gonna say that it's really easy to end up unless you're a particularly extroverted type of player. It's very easy to sort of feel like you've fallen into playing a hireling.
Yeah, I mean, if you're comfortable, if you're more comfortable with being in the background, then it's not really a big problem. But
right,
it's very easy to end up in sort of the shadows and not getting your time in the sun if you're not forceful about make sure you do.
You could totally end up being Chad in Bleach.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually pretty freaking spot on. Honestly, it's definitely a problem. So yeah, there's that, and honestly, it's just, I mean, as I said, it's hard to get players going in a direction. It's just hard to get things going with that big a group, and also it's hard to keep things organized. Just because there's so many different people there.
Yeah.
There's also increased potential for personality conflicts,
Mm.
just because there are more people at the table. And
Yeah, and one set of personality conflicts can foul it for everyone else.
right.
We're all talking about all the bad things about large game groups.
Well, I hate to say it, but they mostly outweigh the good things in my opinion.
It's true. It's true.
I mean, up to a certain. I mean, like, I honestly, up to 6 players, I have really have had almost no problems with anything. It tends to work out. It's just it starts getting a little weird after 6 players. In my experience, I'm not sure
Yeah,
why.
6 players. So 7 plus the GM is
Right.
about before you start where things are about equalized between the advantages of a big group and the disadvantages of a big group.
Yeah. You're more with the group that size. You get the advantages of the more interaction with the players,
Yep.
the ability to withstand players having to miss a week, et cetera, et cetera. And there are a few other things advantages too. I mean, that we haven't really mentioned. I mean, there are probably some other advantages we've not mentioned yet. I'm thinking about it. I can't. The problem is
I will say that a big group like that is like 8 to 10 players is the best breeding ground for a good schemy type of game.
Yeah, I can see that.
And for like Ember or particularly backstabby version of Shadowrun or Cyberpunk.
Yeah.
Or just gonna say it, Paranoia.
Yeah. So yeah, so that covers mostly sort of strength and weaknesses of that type of game, I think.
One other disadvantage: it is nigh impossible to do horror proper in a large group.
Yeah.
Because horror is all about being isolated and feeling. You can't isolate people terribly well, or if you are, you're concentrating on 1 or 2 players at a time. Everyone else is left out.
Yeah. Yeah,
Things
that's.
can't be creepy when you're in a crowd.
They can be. It's just hard to pull off.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
So yeah, from there, I think we should probably talk a bit about small groups now because they present their own unique challenges. So when we talk about a small group, we're talking 3-player characters or less.
Yeah. I'd say that's about right.
And honestly, the interesting thing is how quickly things drop off after. Like I cannot comprehend running an actual role playing game for less than 2 PC for 1 PC. I know people who have done it, and I just can't wrap my brain around it.
Yeah, it's tried it once in high school. It wasn't very successful. It was, yeah, it just didn't work out very well.
I mean, I've done.
There was definitely something missing.
Yeah, I've done games for 2 players a couple of times.
And 2 players could be really fun. 3 players is actually pretty friggin' awesome, honestly.
It depends on the game, but yeah. There are some games that doesn't work very well for. There are I can think of a couple of role-playing games where having like less than 4 players really doesn't work very well. Looking at you, 4th Ed D&D.
Yeah, I could see that. Just because you're not filling all the roles.
Yeah, you can get away without a controller, but if someone really doesn't want to play a leader, it gets tricky.
Yeah.
Again, we talked about it a little bit last week how you can sort of get around that, but yeah.
But it's tough.
And there are a few other games, but so the big thing about small groups is, I'm assuming, Eric, you played a few games like that also.
Oh yeah, certainly.
Right. I've never actually played in a group that small. I've only game mastered them, so I really can't talk about it from the player's side.
From the player's side, things tend to get intimate and not necessarily in a romantic way, but you've got a very buddy cop kind of thing going on when you've got like 2 players, and that's actually really cool.
Yep. Yeah.
And you're basically playing Bad Boys. Depending on the system, but yeah, you end up with a very sort of buddy cop kind of deal, where you are definitely relying on each other like for everything, and it's kind of cool.
Yep.
You don't have the sort of inter-party sneaksiness because You can't do that, but what you gain in camaraderie, I think, makes up for it.
Yeah, yeah, I can definitely see that. Yeah, it's interesting. As I said, I've never actually played in a group that small. I've only run it. Technically speaking, I had played in exactly one game with as a player in a very small group, and that was a one-player thing where I was a player, and that was when I was 8, and my dad was running me through some of the stuff in the basic D&D box set.
Nice.
So I got it as a gift, and we sort of walked through it. He walked me through it, sort of learning some of the details, how it worked, and from there, then I went on to basically playing on my own
Cool.
because it wasn't really his scene.
Right.
But yeah, definitely, I agree with you that there is a definitive sort of, as you mentioned with the big group, it makes it easier for player characters to form bonds between each other and have sort of more interaction. In a small group, you kind of have to.
Yeah.
It's not so much as easier as it almost forces you to do that. Otherwise, you really don't have a lot of. There's not much.
Otherwise, you don't have a game.
Right. Or you're not going to get much role playing in it, because you've got really, very little bounce off. It's if you don't have someone, if the other player, like the other player or two, isn't someone you can really bounce your role playing off of, there's just not going to be much role playing in it. And if it's a good game, still it's a good game, but you lose something big there, and that's a big potential problem actually.
I could see that. Yeah, I haven't run into that problem, but yeah, I could totally see that being an issue.
Yeah, it's a situation where if the players really don't have the PCs don't have the players specifically don't have a lot of role playing chemistry between the two of them, it really doesn't work out very well. In a small group, like if you've got one guy who's big in role play and one guy who is if you got let's say it's a 3-person group, and one guy's big into role play, and one guy's big into combat, and the other guy is sort of in between, is sort of favors one side or the other, or is sort of neutral, someone's going to be disappointed a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Because one style is going to end up sort of dominating play for the most part, and so and it's a problem when if you're like if you've got, let's say if you've got a group of 3 players and one's sort of ambivalent, and it's like, and you're in a very heavy role playing session, 1/3 of your group is going to be kind of bored out of their skull, and that's a problem. And that's sort of actually an advantage of the big group, is it means that if you got people with differing tastes, it means that it means that when you're doing different types of stuff, you have to rotate through different types of stuff so you can keep everybody happy.
Right.
But it means that there's more, like if there's something going on that some people aren't particularly interested in, like for the role, like if there's combat going on, the guys who are really into role play and aren't interested in combat, they can at least role play with them amongst themselves.
Yes.
During the combat, at least. Or they could learn how to roleplay during combat, but that's just my sort of take on it. But whatever.
That's the most fun, is role playing during combat.
I agree completely. But I know people who think that's impossible.
They are dumb. DUM.
I'm not.
That is spelled correctly because I said so.
I'm not casting stones.
My house isn't glass, it's Pyrex. I'm fine.
Pyrex breaks too.
Shut up.
It's just harder to break. Yeah.
But yeah, there's I actually rather like small groups because of all the reasons we're talking about. But there are disadvantages to them.
Yeah, like if a player can't make it a week, game's not happening that week.
Yeah, it's just not happening. If a third of the group can't show up, then it's like, oh, I guess we're gonna not play.
Yeah, it's just nope, not happening. You quickly sort of like, wow, that or if you're in a 2-person group and someone can't make it, nothing's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, half our group's not here this week. Yeah.
Can't do it. Yeah. And I've been in small little intimate campaigns where we just didn't play for a month because real life got in the way.
Right.
Like each week someone else couldn't do it, So
Right. So there's that. There are other small little niggling things that show up. As I said, like in a game which is more heavily structured in sort of its combat, it can cause problems if you have too few players. So
yeah,
as I said, like D&D, often if you've only got a couple players, that can cause problems. And there are ways around that, but they're not always satisfying. And and of course, they've got the problem with player. The big thing is that if issues develop between the players during the game, not like like if you come into it like early on, everything's fine, but if something comes up during the game that's causing an issue, that can basically end the game real fast.
yes.
It's much more. Small groups are much more sensitive to that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's. I wouldn't attempt a small group with players that I hadn't known for years.
Yeah.
Simply because that can happen, or just personal conflicts. Like if I just met a guy and it's gonna be like three of us and some guy running it, I'm gonna be like, okay, let's hope I like this guy and this guy likes me, and we're not trying to kill each other.
Yeah. And the other big drawback is the other drawback to it is I would say that while horror works very well with a small group, weirdly enough, sort of more scheming based games don't work as well.
No, you really can't do a good scheming game with like three people. Because by necessity, everyone's in everyone else's business.
Right, because there's so few of you.
Exactly.
Although I suppose if you had a small group, you could sort of do sort of a, you could sort of set up that you might be able to do with three players or something like where they all have different agendas and they're all basically they're all sort of moving roughly the same direction, but will probably try to backstab each other at the opportune moments. That could almost work.
Yeah, the Dark Heresy game was only three players and a game master. There's a little bit of that, but there was a lot more of the, oh my god, we're all gonna die. Everyone, we totally can't pull this off right now. So let's try to get off the Space Hulk being invaded by Dark Eldar with horrible warp beasts.
Yeah, that sounds like probably a good plan. That sounds like a good plan.
We'll argue the finer points of the enforcement of the Imperial will later. It's time to run away.
Run away! Yeah. Yeah, so I definitely think that's a potential advantage. A disadvantage, I should say, but advantage and disadvantage. But yeah, it's interesting. As I said, I've only run a couple of games for small groups. Almost all the games I've run have had at least 4 player characters. And so I don't have a lot of experience dealing with smaller groups or bigger groups for that matter. But I think we should talk a little bit about potential ways to sort of help fix some of the problems that we're talking about. Sort of things that you can tips and tricks for smaller groups and bigger groups. So why don't we start with the smaller groups since we're talking about that? And I think dealing with some of these problems in a small group is actually arguably in some ways a lot easier.
Communication is absolutely key, and you can't take criticism personally in a small group.
Yep.
The end.
Yeah. I mean, my mantra is in general communication, and more communication in role-playing games. You got to keep in a small group the flow of information about preferences and what you're enjoying, what you're not enjoying, and what's going on and such is key, because otherwise it will lead to it could very well lead to a blow up and ending the game. You got to keep each other informed about this sort of stuff. Otherwise, it's gonna fall apart. I mean, it's not a might fall apart. It will fall apart if you don't keep people informed.
No, it absolutely will fall apart, and probably have some hurt feelings, which is no fun to deal with.
Yeah, that's the other problem with small groups, is that it can lead to that. I mean, that can happen in any size group, but it's.
Yeah, no, the hurt feelings are. Small groups are more prevalent to hurt feelings, and again, it's another reason why I don't do them unless I've been playing with these people for years.
Yeah, so. If there's any doubt about something, it's the big thing is that it's because it's smaller and more intimate, as you pointed out. That intimacy can lead to as you said, hurt feelings and
Yeah.
and blow ups and yeah. So yeah, communication is absolutely vital. And you're right. You're completely right. You have to basically not take criticism personally. It's otherwise and that's part and parcel of the communication thing. Um, in a more combat heavy game, you do have to keep in mind that your character really, if you're going in knowing it's gonna be somewhat combat, there's gonna be combat in this game, your character damn well better be able to pull his weight.
Yes, absolutely.
Um,
That's part of the reason why I always make my character a bare minimum of competency in combat. Because if there's a fight, I'm pulling my weight.
Basically, actually, I want to rephrase that. It's crucial that the game master lets the players know what style of game this is going to be, and all the characters must be capable of doing and participating in that type of game competently.
Yes.
So if it's going to be a stealth-based, sneaking about, Shadowrun-y type game, your characters better be able to operate in that sort of a situation.
Yeah.
If it's going to be a political, talking a lot, diplomacy-based game, your characters have better be able to operate in that sort of environment. As amusing as it is to bring as amusing as it is to have a uncouth, completely blunt, incapable of diplomacy barbarian in a normal fantasy game, even one that's sort of heavily politically motivated in a normal sized group. In a small group, that's a really bad idea.
I've made it work, and that he was actually much better at it in his than he liked to let on.
Sure.
And that actually worked out pretty well. He cultured the image of the dumbass brute. Look at that silly low class guy. It's okay. He could do. Don't worry about him. He's not the same type. We don't have to hold him the same standards. That's right.
Yeah, but that character is capable of doing it.
Yes.
He is not incapable of doing it, is my point.
Yeah, that's true.
That's the thing. So, like, when I'm saying that sort of character, I don't mean the character who's doing that and is basically playing down his intelligence, his ability to talk to people and interact. It's a character who is dumb and is brutish and is uncouth and is incapable of operating in a social situation. That's a bad idea in that sort of game.
This is true.
And as amusing as you could, like a cowardly thief who is incompetent in combat, can be in a larger group. In a small group, that's a terrible idea.
Yeah.
Also, in a small group, I would highly recommend avoiding the lone wolf character. I would recommend avoiding a true lone wolf anyways in any game, but in a small group, that's almost guaranteed to cause problems.
Yeah. Dude, where were you? I was scouting. Well, because you were scouting, we got ambushed and almost died.
Well, I mean, even that, it's just like, player characters who want to split off and go do different things on their own means that the group is almost never together, and why are we playing a group game at this point? I mean, it's...
Yeah, this is true.
Like, for instance, Amber does not work well with, 3 players. I mean, it can be done, but you really want at least 4, preferably at least 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, so... Let's see. So yeah, those are some of the basic things. As a game master, you have to be hyper if it's a combat game, you have to be in any sort of game. You have to be hyper vigilant on making sure that whatever challenges you're throwing at your players, whatever sort of subscope of type, be it political, be it stealth based, be it combat, be it whatever, you have to be careful to make sure that that the level of challenge you're aiming at one player is going to be equally challenging for the other player, because
yeah.
The character balance in terms of rough equivalency, in terms of ability to basically hang with each other in most areas, is very important in a small group, because otherwise, especially in combat, if it's a combat heavy game, if one character is much better in combat than another character, something that can challenge them will just wipe out the other character, and then it's just one guy. Whereas something that's challenging for the less powerful guy will just be walked over by the powerful guy.
Yeah.
So as interesting as say Batman and Superman are when they're operating together in a comic book, that's a lot of fun and interesting. In an actual role-playing game, that's problematic.
it starts to fall apart in the actual role playing
Because
game.
is it an actual fight? Anything that can challenge Superman, Batman can do basically jack and squat to in a fight.
Yeah, but Batman can't hang against Darkseid. Is what it boils down to.
And there are things that Batman can do in a story that's written that you could pull that off, and even and have it not seem weird. But in a game, it doesn't work well.
Yeah.
And similarly, in a purely investigatory thing, Superman has some tricks to hang with Batman, but Batman so outclasses him in that sort of type thing.
It's true.
So while it works brilliantly it can work brilliantly in a comic book, it doesn't work as well in an actual role playing game. So balance is actually important in a small group. Actually, interestingly enough, that's the other big advantage to a very big group. Being very specialized.
Balance, yes.
Yeah, and if you like the very very the super skill monkey who's terrible in a fight is much less of a liability in a fight in a very large group than in a smaller group.
Yeah, that extra D4 from the daggers isn't going to really make that big a difference when you've got 10 guys wheeling on the beastie. But when it's just 3, those D4 are important.
Yeah. But definitely keeping that in mind is crucial for a game master in a small group. Absolutely crucial. Not just in the combat area, but in like any sort of room, is make sure that you're keeping things an equivalent level of challenge for all the players.
Yes,
is something you have to keep in mind. And you have to be sure that, as always, you have to make sure to give the players, each character their own time to shine. But that's less of a problem in a small group, unless one player is vastly more extroverted than the other player. In which case that's
then weirdness starts to happen.
Yeah. Can you think of any other sort of major tips for a small group? Thing that that might be important.
I think we covered them all.
I mean, there probably are some that we're forgetting about, but I think it's most of the small group advice I've got. For a very large group, we should probably cover that. We have to cover that also. So,
sub GMs are so useful.
That helps a lot. It really does. Having one of the players, be able to delegate some of the game master's tasks to one of the players is huge. Is a huge advantage. Or just having somebody there who is willing to help out as a game master, like who's actually a second game master. Yeah. It's weird, and you have to have you almost have to have a hierarchy unless you want to alternate whose story you're doing in a given sort of arc. Like you can have two game masters who alternate stories or something like that, but in general, you sort of have like a primary game master and a secondary game master. And the secondary is one there to basically handle it for when you've got to deal like half the group doing one thing and this group doing that thing.
Yep.
But you don't even have to have a secondary game master. Even just having one player who is good at organization and good at keeping things on task.
Holy crap.
They can sort of operate as almost a second game master, especially someone who is very good at being fair-minded and keeping separate, his what his character is doing and what and from what he has to do as a sort of sub GM.
Yeah.
But yeah, organization is one of the most important things you can do in a large group. Having good organizational skills as a game master and as a player, you don't need it for all the players. Don't need it, but having one or two players who are good at keeping things organized is huge. As a game master, you have to be organized in a big group. Otherwise, it's just not going to work.
You can't do it slipshod with a big group. It's just too much shit will start falling through the cracks, and like little inconsequential things that might not matter in smaller to average sized groups add up really quick with a big group.
Yeah. Additionally, you have to be very cognizant about giving players their time in the sun. It takes a lot of work, but you got to make sure to give each player a chance to shine. And again, as I always say, communication is key. It's very key in this. Although a lot of it's going to happen away from the table.
Yeah.
But you're keeping in touch with all the players.
The table. It's honestly, when I've been in a big group, it's usually just we just take over the entire bottom floor.
Yeah. So, but you have to be. The important thing is that you have to be the group has to be comfortable with the fact that some players are going to be directly involved in FaceTime with the game master at times, and not all the group is going to be directly involved in that. Just because it's hard to focus on in a large group, it's hard for the game master to keep an eye on everything all at once. So being patient as a player is huge. If you're a player in a large group, knowing when to, knowing that if the game master is working with some other players on something, knowing that your time will come, and you just don't get upset about it. Just let the game master know that when he's got time, there's something you want to cover with him. There's something like role playing you want to do, or there's some action you want to take care of, and be polite about it. But you have to. It's both a combination of you have to be patient, but you also have to be sure that you are clear that you do need time.
Yes.
Because otherwise, as we said, someone's gonna one or two players are gonna end up dominating things just because the odds of getting someone who's likely to do that increases in a larger group. So
considerably.
Yeah. But yeah, keeping track of honestly, following the rules for in combat is actually arguably more important in big groups than in smaller groups, for the very simple reason that a lot of the rules are there to keep things moving at a steady pace.
Yeah.
So, for instance, in a large group and in combat, be sure to be if combat's happening, when it's not your turn to do something, be sure you're thinking about what you're going to do when your turn comes, so that when it's your turn, you can do it and get it done with quickly, so you can move on to the next guy, so you're not just monopolizing the table.
Holy crap, that's important.
Because,
and sometimes you're left their pants are under your ankles because they just removed the problem you were going to solve. It's like, I guess I'm going to pull up my pants now.
Right. So I mean, as much as I appreciate the fact that for a lot of players, spending time cautiously thinking about every move, everything they want to do during a combat is good, and they really enjoy that, and it's a lot of fun. But in a large group, you're going to have to cut some of that out and just be decisive and act quickly, and get most of your thinking done before it's your turn, because otherwise it's going to bog down. And if everybody starts doing it, combat will take literally forever.
Yeah.
But this means that the big tip I've got for this is that means while combat's happening, you have to be paying attention, even if it's not your turn.
Everyone shut the hell up and do your combat.
Right. Don't start bickering with players. Don't start going off on tangents. As fun as that is, it will drag the combat out forever. Especially if you're it comes around to your turn and you don't know what's happening. Unless you're one of those people who can sort of go, who was quite comfortable saying, oh, it's my turn. I guess I'll move up and attack that. Done. Go.
That is kind of liberating to do.
Sure, but
yeah, it's not always the best thing to do.
If you're very good at sizing up something very quickly, I guess that you can get away with it. But honestly, it really helps me paying attention the whole time.
I'm just remembering the fourth ed game when I was playing the Barbarian. I was like, all right, combat starts. I charge that thing. Then if it dies, I charge the other thing behind it.
Yeah.
That was really kind of fun.
Vroom!
Tactics, screw that. I'm going to chop things.
Yep. But as I said, it's yeah. So, and similarly, if there's something important that's going on role playing wise, and your character is present, pay fucking attention.
You absolutely got to pay attention. Unless it's part of your character's shtick where it just goes, huh?
And I guess that's fine, but that I think it would eventually get kind of wearing. But
yes.
That said, I mean, again, if your group is specifically splitting up into subgroups to deal with stuff, that's fine. But if everybody's in a big scene and there's a big scene that all the characters are present for and important stuff's going down, pay fucking attention.
Yeah.
Because nothing bogs a game down more than having to constantly repeat what's going on to everybody all the time.
and it's very tiring and very annoying, and it's a good way to exasperate everyone around you.
Yep.
Especially when it happens the third time.
Uh-huh. Again, one other important little bit, some other things that are good, that are big and helpful. Having a player who is willing to take notes during the game, so keeping track of what's going on, so you have something that easily help recapping at the start of the next session. That's helpful in any sort of game, but in a large group, it's sort of borders on crucial. It's very helpful to have something so that you can sort of refer back to, like, so especially if you've had someone who's missed a week, because in a large group, someone can miss a week and you can still play. It means that you can easily, very quickly, sort of go, oh, flip the notes. Here's what happened last session. Boom, done, go. Which is helpful.
Yeah.
It's things like that are very helpful. But as I said, communication's crucial as always. If you're playing this system, that if you really insist, if you've got a group of players who are notorious for being slow on their turn, honestly, one way to help in a large group is to enforce a very strict rule during combat that you have X amount of time to declare your move and to take your turn. And if you're not resolving your turn by the time it's over, tough luck, your turn ends.
Yeah. You don't do anything this turn. Moving on.
Right. And it sucks, but it forces it's about the only way you can keep things moving quickly in a group like that. If it's like only one person's notorious for it, don't bust out immediately. But if they keep taking forever in the turn and bogging the thing down, basically start giving the warning, like, look, dude, it's a case of communication. Talk to them outside the game and say, look, I appreciate you like taking the time and such, but your time thinking about your turn, but it's making everything bog down during combat, and your turn is taking as long as the rest of the groups combined.
So cut the shit out.
So we have to find a way to speed things up for you. What can we do to speed things up for you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't approach it as cut that shit out. I would approach it as how can we work this out to speed things up on your turn?
Well, you're more diplomatic than I am.
That's because I game master a lot, and that's this. You have to be in that sort of situation. Let's see. I'm trying to think of other things off the top of my head that sort of picture that. I mean,
I really, the sub game masters is so useful because they could be sitting there keeping track of things. They can even run half the combat for you.
Yeah, and that's the big thing. Is especially in a combat heavy game like Dungeons and Dragons, having someone to help run the baddies is huge.
Yeah,
absolutely huge. And honestly, having someone especially having someone you can delegate, like keeping track of initiative, keeping track of helping run the baddies and doing this and that, big help. Mm-hmm. Unless you're, that's helpful in a normal sized group, is delegating out someone else to help keep track of the initiative.
Yeah. Because not everyone has like their little program or notepad or what have you. But yeah, that combat's such a pain in the ass with large groups.
It really is.
It simply because there's so much shit going on.
Yeah, and
at the same time you're forced to remain passive and sit there and wait for your turn.
Yeah, and anything that slows things down multiplies across the multiple people. Like, honestly, if you're like say 3rd edition D&D, where if you've got multiple summoners.
Oh, Jesus Christ, yeah. Friggin' time dilation wizards.
Yeah. It's just all of a sudden things just slow to a grinding halt. It's bad enough when you've got one in a normal game, but it just all of a sudden things just like, oh god.
I summon my swarm of dire weasels. I summon my swarm of dire monkey bees. I summon my swarm of no more swarms.
Fine, I start gating in dragons. I hate you. Rocks fall, everybody dies. Yeah, I'm trying to think of other notes. Can you think of anything else off the top of your head? I mean, beyond that? I mean, it's...
The thing is, I've done a bunch of both, but it always boils down to basically it just comes down to us repeating ourselves. Pay fucking attention. Don't take shit personally. Um,
And communicate. I mean,
and communicate. Yeah.
and
I mean, there are definitely unique challenges, which I think we've done a good job going over. Like, that combat takes forever, and if someone can't make it to a session for a tiny one, a session just doesn't happen.
yeah. Actually, one other important bit that I want to talk about for a large group is in role playing scenes. You really it can help to come up with a way to sort of make sure that you got like even just like to make sure everyone gets their time to role play, like to talk during that sort of scene. Uh, you know, honestly, you might even have to break down to having some sort of actual formal way to, like the classic sort of having an object that you pass around when to people who
Yeah.
so it's my turn to talk next, and you make sure that gets passed around, and you make sure that no one over monopolizes it. You have come up with different like rules to make sure that that no one monopolizes everything, so everyone has a chance to do what they want to do during a combat, to do during a role playing scene, because otherwise, people will get frozen out just because
Yep. Just because the more aggressive and extroverted will be monopolizing time in the
it's
life.
not even in a group with people who are sort of all, even if you have a large group of people, all of them are very comfortable role playing and somewhat extroverted in this way. It can still happen that because of what's happening in a given scene, two players end up becoming a focus of it just because the game master started interacting with them and just keeps doing that.
Yeah.
And it helps to have some way for other players to be able to notify and interject when they want to without having to shout about it.
Mm.
And so having like the passing of the skate the sort of the scepter to, like you've got like a little stick that you pass around to make sure that everyone gets their chance to talk.
I haven't run into that problem too much, but I have seen people get frozen out.
Yeah.
Having been one that's been frozen out a couple of times, I started taking to just shouldering my way in there.
Right, but it's as I said, I think having a formalized structure for dealing with like at least having in mind a way to keep it to formalize it if you need to is a handy thing to do. That's what I'm saying. It's not necessary for all groups. It's just one of those things that it's something to keep in mind. Is what I'm saying.
It's a good idea. Is what I'm saying. I just haven't.
Yeah, you haven't run into
seen it employed, right?
Yeah. I've seen it employed. I've never had to employ it. The other important thing is honestly having some. And actually, in a large group, it's actually very helpful to have some way to make sure it's clear when you're talking in character and out of character. Because you will find that in a large group there tends to be more out of character banter just going on like on the side when if a group is like not some people are not involved directly, like if the party's somewhat split up or and that happens sometimes.
The good old fashioned fist on the top of your head works for that.
That works. Just having some sort of way to indicate that I'm talking out of character at the moment. Like if you're if you're talking and you bring up something to the group, make sure that it's clear that you're either in or out of character, however you want to handle it.
Right.
But as long as it's clear, just be sure that you find some way to make sure it's clear, is what I'm saying.
Now I'm suddenly imagining people with little, like, OOC signs.
Oh, dear Lord.
I have had instances in large groups where I'm trying to talk to someone at the side of the table, so I just start writing things on my notepad and holding it up.
Right.
This is before the time of texts, for we are old and ancient and terrible.
Right. Okay. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers everything. I mean, it's. I don't know. I would say, honestly, I would say that I definitely have something of a preference for smaller groups. If I have to choose between the two, honestly, I have a preference for the mid-range groups. In all honesty, it's just where I prefer being. But if I'm not in that sort of category, if I have to choose between a very large group and a smaller group, I'll take the smaller group. just because it's easier to organize and I don't have to worry about things taking for fucking ever usually.
Yeah.
Which would you prefer? I mean,
I don't know where to go with this, honestly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. I thought you were pretty firmly in the camp. You'd prefer a smaller group to an oversized group.
I really, really, really love my smaller groups, but there's something about larger groups that are pretty cool too.
Okay, fair enough.
This is also probably because I haven't been in one in a couple of years.
Fair enough.
So I'd probably get back and go, oh, right, I remember why I don't like this.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah, I imagine it's kind of like, yeah, that sounds awesome. Let's go do it. Oh, right, I forgot. I hate socks, or something. I hate only wearing left socks. That sounded fun and zany until I tried it.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm just trying to think of other, anything else, and I'm sort of blanking on other sort of.
Yeah, I'm kind of words thought process.
All right, so I think that pretty much covers everything we're gonna talk about on the topic tonight. Honestly, I've got nothing else to say on them other than if I have to choose between the two, I would prefer a smaller group. But
groups are really fun, but yeah, larger groups. You know what? The more I think about it, the more I think, you know what? This is probably just me glossing over all the problems in my memory.
That would never happen.
That just happened. Certainly not to me.
Yeah. Honestly, there's also. I mean, I would prefer to have a medium-sized group in general. I mean,
medium-sized groups do seem to be best. You get the best mix of them both.
That's sort of my point.
Yeah.
But if I have to, if I choose between the two, I would definitely go with that. So I think that wraps up that sort of bit of this. If anyone we unfortunately did not get any email questions or anything on the forums in terms of questions this week.
I am saddened.
But if anyone in the chat watching us live has a question, now would be a good time to post it up, and we'll try to cover it quickly before we wrap things up for the night. So we got about 5-10 minutes. So anybody in the chat, if you've got questions, please do feel free to do that. But for future note, if you do have questions you'd like answered at the end of the show, we tend to try to save a little bit of time at the end of the show to answer questions. You can always email it to us. Our email address is surlygrognards@yahoo.com. Or you can send them to us on the forums, which you can find at mechagm.forumer.com. So I figured I'd buy a little bit of time by giving the information there now. Not seeing anything in the chat at the moment.
Yeah, I'm.
Well, Joe Mutant asks, what's the ideal number for a game in my opinion? As I said, between 4 and 6 PCs.
Yeah, I wouldn't go higher than 6, because then you start again the balance starts to shift, which we've said several times now I think about it.
Yeah. So honestly, I would say either 5 or 6. I think 4 starts running to. I'm
4 I find is pretty good. Honestly,
4 is 4. If I had to choose between 4, 5, and 6, I would choose 5. But honestly, meh. They're all good. They all work well.
Yeah, I'd probably go 4 myself. But yeah.
Yeah, my one problem with 4 player, the one problem I have with the 4-player group is it's a little bit more vulnerable to have if a player misses a week, then we have to take the week off than a 5 or 6 player
there is
game.
that. Yeah.
And it's sort of a 6 of one, half dozen another. So Dewani wanted to know, is there a good way? What is a good way to start a game or play a game in your local area? Okay. We've talked about this. I think we mentioned that we talked a little bit about this at some point. But first thing, find out if there is a friendly local neighborhood game store.
Yes.
Within whatever distance you're comfortable traveling. If there is a game store in the area that carries role-playing games, most of them tend to have bulletin boards where people can post information about games they're running, or that they're looking for players or looking for game masters, etc. You can go there, see if there's anything in there, get the information, talk to the players, and see what you can do. Or you can just hang out in the game store, run into people, and talk to them and get to know them there. You can similarly find things online. There are a lot of games will have bulletin, like sort of on their message boards for
looking for player kind of deal.
Looking for player type thing, and I know for a fact that WotC used to have a section on their forums for D&D that was broken down by by regions and cities and such, and that was a good way you could find groups of that. And of course, if you were looking for players to play with online, that's even easier. But if you're looking for live players, that sort of thing. Or if you've got a group of friends who don't roleplay but you think might be interested, you could always sort of suggest it to them and see if they're interested in giving it a try.
Yeah, totally. Dragging friends into roleplaying is... Yes, come play my games with me.
Yeah. Be reasonable about how you approach that. And one more question we got is
Jade, what's your advice for a DM whose group tends to go mad with power, usually within 1 or 2 sessions, as they see an awesome high stuff level blah 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 and thus do all sorts of insane things to get them. Example, one player wanted to napalm a whole land of dragons using fireball magic and a lot of oil for the experience, and to loot the dragon nests.
Okay.
Give them what they asked for, not what they want, what they asked for.
Okay, first off...
Be a genie!
Yeah, okay, first off... Alright, so the players want more power than they're starting with.
This isn't really wanting more powers than what they're starting with. This is about kind of going over the top crazy with what power they have.
Yeah, so for starters, Clark one in the chat pointed out that fire-breathing dragons would be immune to napalm, wouldn't they? Yes. My other thought is oil doesn't burn that hot, actually. So, and admittedly, you even a dragon
or let them do it, and now you've got all the dragons very mad at them for their attempted genocide.
There is that also, yes. The other important bit is, remember one other crucial... in this particular example, remember, dragons fly.
Yes. Why is everything on fire? Why is my house on fire? I'm going to stay up here till I find there's a wizard throwing fireballs. I'm going to go eat him.
But ignoring that, if this keeps happening in games you're running, it's probably a sign that there's a disconnect between you and the players about what they want out of the game.
Yeah.
And this is something you probably need to talk to the players about and find out where the disconnect is. This is not a case of right or wrong. This is a case of preferences, and you need to work it out.
No, attempted genocide just for the XP and the loot is pretty wrong.
Oh, that's not what I mean.
Now, attempted genocide because they're elves, then I'm totally down with that.
Ignoring that for a second, I'm not talking about the particular act. I'm talking about the player preferences for, I want lots of power and blowing things up and getting cool loot all at once. So, find out why it is that they want all this power immediately. If it's just because they're looking for a more comedic, over-the-top, blow everything up game, fine. If you're interested in running that, great. If it's something you're not interested in running, maybe you guys aren't really in the right game. You guys aren't probably suited to be gaming with each other in this type of game right now. You might want to have to change it up and find a different way to run the game.
It's I think I kinda know what she's going with. It's something I usually see with people brand spanking new to the experience.
Yep.
They're like, I can throw fireballs, I'm gonna burn everything! Blah!
Yeah, and Clark one points out, punishing players for letting them succeed is one of the root of great game mastering, to a degree. Here's the thing. I wouldn't say punishing them for letting them succeed is root of great game mastering.
Making them realize there's such a thing as consequences.
I wouldn't even go that far. I would say definitively challenging them by letting them by letting them succeed is a staple. I tend to using the term punishing really sort of I find sort of it grates me the wrong way. I don't like punishing my players because I don't think that's conducive to a good gaming environment. But finding ways to if they when the players succeed to use that in ways to make the game more interesting and challenging is good. And don't get me wrong, there are times when punishing is something you might have to do. This is about the only way the players will learn a lesson that they might need to learn. But and this might be one of those situations. In all honesty, I mean, but again, there are times when giving the players what they ask for and not what they want is will be very helpful.
Yes.
It's like for instance, one of my pet peeves is, and this is it's one of the staples and one of the running sort of almost running jokes about D&D is the wish spell. Honestly, my take on the wish spell and the way what's become of how DMs handle it, I hate it. I hate it with a burning passion because it is become it is to the point where players don't want the wish spell because it is a way because it almost becomes a way for the game master to screw the players, and that is antithetical to what I believe a role-playing game is about. It's not a it should not be confrontational. And the way wishes have become traditionally handled in D&D, where you have to basically lawyer up the whole thing, and the game master will look for every possible way to screw you over with the wish.
That should only be employed when you're dealing with an Ifrit or a genie or some other malevolent or even just chaotic entity granting the wish.
Yeah. Honestly, the big problem is that the fact that the problem is that wishes like that really should be plot devices and really shouldn't be something that's a game element is sort of what I'm thinking about. Is the way I look at it, because is if you don't have don't run things that draconian on it, then it becomes too easy to abuse. But if you do that, then it becomes something that even in a game where you're trying not to do that, and you're trying not to be confrontational or be that draconian, and you put up a situation where the players will get a wish to try to do something that'll help advance the story in some way, the players won't use it because they are deathly afraid of the wish. I mean, honestly, in most role-playing, most D&D groups I've been involved in, giving the possibility of giving the players wishes, they go, no, I don't want them. Like, a Ring of Three Wishes is people react to it almost like it's a cursed item. And that's, honestly, my take on that is, honestly, the concept of granting a wish has become almost, I don't use them anymore. I basically just said, you know what, you can't win with it anymore. And I just don't use it. I don't use it anymore, basically. It's like, if either it's going to be abused by the players or they're going to run screaming in terror from it. And honestly, in most situations where I would want to throw a wish in so that they could do something with that, honestly, it's as a plot device, it's kind of weak. It's almost like in some ways the worst case version of Deus Ex Machina. It almost literally is Deus Ex Machina. I mean, it's you basically saying, okay, players, how do you want to fix things?
Okay.
It's a weak storytelling element. Basically, is my point. From either, basically, it's either something so heavily regulated that it turns into sort of competition between the players and the game master, to see who can out legalese the other, or it becomes a weak storytelling element and is pointless. And I honestly, I've come to the conclusion that I'm done with them.
You don't care. Fair enough.
It's like, I was ecstatic that Wish doesn't exist in 4th edition. The Wish spell is a terrible idea. Let me just say this right now. There's almost no redeeming feature to the Wish spell. There never has been. There never will be.
I have to agree with you.
The consequence of the only version of that worked at all was the Lesser Wish one, and that's because it had an actual mechanical set of things that you could do with it that wouldn't screw the players over. You could use it to, like, okay, I can use this to cast any lower level spell I don't know, that I don't have memorized or even know, and that won't hurt me. It's like, oh, okay, cool. And the GM, it explicitly says the GM is not allowed to screw you over for this, but you're using it to recreate something that has mechanical rules for it. And it's like, okay, that was clever. It's still a terrible spell. But other than that, I think.
Where could you get Feng Shui?
Okay, I'll cover that now. Yeah, so I can remember. I was thinking about the same after the show, but I can answer that very quickly. All right. Honestly, you pretty much have to order it offline at this point. Most stores don't carry it. You can order it directly from Atlas Games. Let me dig up the actual address for it. Their website. There you go. You want to go to atlas-games.com. Click on product info and scroll down to the role-playing games and click on the little Feng Shui logo. And you should be able to order it from them through. You can basically order it through a bunch of different places. Atlas Game Shopping. Here we go. Yeah, you can basically order it through a bunch of online places like Warehouse 23. You can either download the PDF of it. I believe they can send you a hard copy of it. Yeah, hang on a second. I'll put it in the chat also. But I suspect you can probably find it on Amazon or on eBay. Almost certainly can find a copy of it on eBay. They are not, as far as I know, they're not publishing new. They have not published new books for it for a while. But I believe you can still basically buy any of the books that they had in print at any point. Other than that, yeah, I think that so yeah, basically you have to get it online. Most game stores don't. You could ask if you've got a friendly local neighborhood game store. Ask them if they can order it. They might not be able to, but just tell them if they basically say, okay, if you could order me a copy of Feng Shui, it's published by Atlas Games. If they can get it, they can get it. If they can't, they can't. Any must-haves out of the supplemental books for Feng Shui? Yes, you want the base rules. The only other must-have, I think, is Golden Combat, the Player's Guide. The other books are all helpful and useful, but none of them are mandatory, in my opinion. They're all good. Like, all of them are really fun and useful. Well, not all of them. All the ones that are detailed on the individual factions, like the Architect's book, Which Seated in the New Flesh, Seal of the Wheels, the Ascended book, Blood of the Valiants, the Guiding Handbook, Guerrilla Warfare is the Jammer's book.
Yay, Jammers!
I think Thorns of the Lotus is the Eaters of the Lotus book. Yeah, it is. Those are the faction books. They're all really useful. Elevator of the Netherworld has some useful stuff on the Netherworld in it. But again, it's not. All you really need is the base rules. It's nice to have It's very nice to have the Player's Guide though. Also, it's got a lot of really useful info in it. And the Player's book is Golden Comeback. But any of the other books, they're all fun. And the Jammer's book is one of the best written books in the thing. And honestly, fixes a couple of archetypes. That actually helps a lot by giving them an alternate option. Basically, there are a couple of... anyways, it's got a bunch of useful options in it. Anyways, I think we probably need to wrap things up at this point because we've gone a little bit long.
Yeah, I think we're good.
We've gone a little bit long this week, but that's cool. Anyways, thanks to everybody for listening this week. We will be back again next week. We're going to be talking about our favorite mythos. Gods and it's mythos. I think is actually the plural of it.
Okay, so it's like
I think mythos is its own plural.
Gotcha.
At any rate, we'll be talking about our favorite gods and deities and so on and so forth. Some of them, and we'll cover that next week. That's our plan for next week, at least, assuming we actually remember. Anyways, guys, thanks for listening. If you have questions that you'd like answering the show, if you got feedback for us, we love feedback. Please give us feedback, dear Lord. If you got criticisms, potential show topics, we love show topics also. You can email them to us. Our email address is surlygrognards@yahoo.com, surlygrognards @yahoo.com. Or you can post them on our forums, mechagm.forumer.com, mechagm.forumer, Forumer.com. You can find me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @mechagm, and I'm, of course, on both Facebook and Google Plus as Peter Bowman. You can find Eric's work on the webcomic Boston Arcanum, which I believe is still on a hiatus, correct?
Yes.
But if you haven't checked it out, go check it out. It's bostonarcanum.com. Other than that, we'll be back next week. Thanks for watching. And so until next week, take care and keep on gaming. Say goodnight, Eric.
Good night, Eric.
Good night, everybody.